Hello and welcome to the Data Engineering Podcast, the show about modern data management. When you're ready to build your next pipeline and want to test out the projects you hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so check out our friends over at Linode. With their managed Kubernetes platform, it's now even easier to deploy and scale your workflows, or try out the latest Helm charts from tools like Pulsar, Pachyderm, and Dagster. With simple pricing, fast networking, object storage, and worldwide data centers, you've got everything you need to run a bulletproof data platform. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/Linode today, that's Linode, and get a $100 credit to try out a Kubernetes cluster of your own. And don't forget to thank them for their continued support of this show. Are you bogged down by having to manually manage data access controls, repeatedly move and copy data, and create audit reports to prove compliance? How much time could you save if those tasks were automated across your cloud platforms? Immuta is an automated data governance solution that enables safe and easy analytics in the cloud. Their comprehensive data-level security, auditing, and de-identification features eliminate the need for time-consuming manual processes, and their focus on data and compliance team collaboration empowers you to deliver quick and valuable analytics on the most sensitive data to unlock the full potential of your cloud data platforms. Learn how they streamline and accelerate manual processes to help you derive real results from your data at dataengineeringpodcast.com/Immuta. That's IMMUTA. The only thing worse than having bad data is not knowing that you have it. With Big Eye's data observability platform, if there is an issue with your data or data pipelines, you'll know right away and can get it fixed before the business is impacted. Big Eye lets data teams measure, improve, and communicate the quality of your data to company stakeholders. With complete API access, a user-friendly interface, and automated yet flexible alerting, you've got everything you need to establish and maintain trust in your data. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/Big Eye today to sign up and start trusting your analyses. Your host is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Soumyadeb Mitra about his experience as the founder of Rudderstack and its role in your data platform. So Soumyadeb, can you start by introducing yourself?
Hey, I'm Soumyadeb. I am the founder and CEO of Rudderstack. So thanks for having me here. I'm really excited to be talking to you. I've been doing Rudderstack for the last 2.5 years. It started in 2019. And before that, I spent a year in a company called 8x8. Prior to that, started a company in the marketing automation space, building the next-gen marketing automation tool using ML and AI. And all through that, I think the pain point that I faced was like marketing teams talk about doing a lot of cool stuff like around personalization and so on, but they do not have the data to do that. And that's what we are trying to solve with Rudderstack. So that's kind of my level.
And do you remember how you got involved in the area of data?
So yeah, it goes back all the way to my grad school where I was doing a PhD in this group. My advisor used to do a lot of high performance computing. So like the research group worked on like these rocket simulations and my advisor looked at like all that IO and like how do you handle like this huge amount of like simulation data, saving that, loading that. So I kind of joked, I worked on big data before big data was cool. Like did a lot of ML at that point. Again, this was like pre-deep learning, like traditional ML, high volume of data. So that's what was kind of my start with data.
So you mentioned that Rudderstack started with sort of frustration with letting marketers be able to collect and take advantage of the data having to do with the interactions that users were having with the products. I'm wondering if you can just give a bit more of an overview about what it is that you've built there and some more of the story behind how it came to be and why you decided that this was the particular problem domain that you wanted to spend your time and energy on right now.
So I'll start with the problem that we are trying to solve in my previous company, Mariana IQ, and that'll give you the context of like what are the problems like people are facing, we faced as a company, but also like our customers faced, right? So like let's say if you're any consumer brand, like pick anything, Crate & Barrel, let's say, and you want to know what your customers are doing on the website and what products they're clicking, what purchases they are making. And why do you want to collect all that data? The number one use case is like analytics. You just want to understand how people are using the product, where they are dropping off in the funnel, what products are being searched more, and so on. Right? So the analytics is generally where you all start. And you need to collect this activity data to do that, right? Then beyond that comes like marketing, right? I mean, you want to like do personalized marketing on top of that data, right? So you want to like send coupons based on what they did. Like let's say you dropped off at the checkout page, you want to send them some kind of a coupon, right? Beyond that comes like more ML AI use cases, right? You want to, let's say, predict which customer is to convert or not. And based on that, you want to give them some coupons, or you want to predict which subscribers are going to churn, and you want to give something to them, prevent that churn, right? So there are these like ML use cases beyond that. And finally, there are like more of real-time personalization use cases. Like you want to like build a model for users and then like personalize their web experience based on what they have searched in the past and like what they like, what they don't like, and so on. So there are a lot of use cases that a team, whether it's a marketing team or the data team, wants to build. And like it all starts with a platform to collect this data, process this data, and so on, right? Now, this was really hard for various reasons. Like you have to build the infrastructure, you have to build, like set up something like a Hadoop cluster, let's say pre-data warehouse era, right? So to collect this data, you have to set up Spark to process that data. Like it is not like trivial. Now, some of the things have become easy, really made it easy to like collect and store and process, that data. Some parts are still hard, right? Around data collection, activation, and so on. And that's what we're kind of trying with solving with Rudderstack. I mean, that's kind of a very, very high level overview.
Particularly for the time frame of the 5, 6, 7 years ago, when people were thinking about being able to collect all of this information and be able to route it to all the different destinations that they wanted to take advantage of that information in. The kind of big name in the space was Segment. And I know that at least in some of the marketing, Rudderstack has kind of positioned itself as an alternative to Segment for different use cases. And I'm just wondering if you can give your thoughts now, a couple of years into your work at Rudderstack, how you think about the position of your tool and your platform in the rapidly expanding ecosystem of data products and data tools, both open source and commercial, where, when you first launched, it was as a kind of direct reflection of what Segment was doing, and you were adding some additional capabilities there and being the open source alternative. And now we've added in things like Stitch and Fivetran for data collection. We've added things like Census and Hightouch and Grouperoo for the reverse ETL or data activation part. And just curious sort of how you think about your position in that space.
That's a great question, and goes back to like what I was saying. We are trying to solve the customer data use case, right? As a company, like consumer company or a B2B company, what are you trying to do with customer data? Like you start with like the very simple use case where you want to just collect the data and send it to multiple destinations, like when you are a small company. And then like at some point you mature, you hire your first data analyst and you want to like bring other sources of data, maybe your transaction data, maybe your ticketing data, to build out more advanced dashboards, right? And the next step to that is like you make your data in your warehouse more active, right? It's not just about getting the data and building reports, but also like taking the data and sending it to different destinations, whether it's like a lead score model or a churn model or a recommendation. And finally, it's like the real-time personalization use case where you want to like sync that data into some kind of an online store and consume that in the app for like personalizing the app experience, right? So this is the journey that a customer has to take. And we want to be the platform which enables the customers to take that journey, right? So that's how we kind of think about this. Now, like, of course, there are overlaps with other vendors, right? I mean, you can technically build this entire stack out with everything DIY. You can write the whole code yourself. You can buy 3 different vendors and do parts of it. And I mean, you can buy like Segment to do event stream. You can buy like ETL, reverse ETL to do some other part of it. Or you can buy Rudderstack, right? So I think where we will shine is the customer data use case. Like the ETL vendors are used beyond just customer data. Like there are BI use cases and like operations use case. And same for reverse ETL. Like customer data is like a narrow part of all the use cases. Like even the customers, from what I understand, is often different. Sometimes it's more B2B versus like B2C. We are like, again, laser focused on the customer data use cases, like enable this entire journey for our customers.
The conception of what customer data is can definitely vary based on the industry or the organization. And in the default case, when people think of customer data, they're probably talking about maybe e-commerce, where somebody is coming to a website, they want to be able to track the kind of user funnel to see, okay, they've landed on the site, they're browsing around, they're maybe searching for a specific product, they've added something to the cart, I want to be able to do abandoned cart notifications, I want to be able to track sales, and then be able to feed that back into my sales and marketing to say, okay, people who followed this path and came in from this route are more likely to purchase, so I want to put my marketing dollars into this particular advertising channel. And beyond that, I'm wondering, what are some of the ways that people can think about what actually constitutes customer data, or the sort of formulation of what makes somebody a customer, and some of the ways that that might be expanded beyond just this very narrow e-commerce scope?
So I think if you can kind of like go back to the use cases you talked about, right? I mean, what is it you're trying to solve with customer data, right? So let's take that first example of like marketing attribution. You want to understand which channels are working to get like high value customers and like which channels are not working, right? So that requires you to bring whatever web data, right? What people are doing and they're transacting and so on. And that's kind of one source. And the other source of data is like just the ad spend data, like how much you're spending on like Google and on Facebook, on what campaigns. And you have to kind of join these two sources, like to build out a marketing attribution model. And then people do very simple attribution models like first touch, last touch. You can do like complex ones. Like we have kind of done like multi-touch attribution models. They're like game theoretic models, and we've kind of written some things around that, right? So that's again one use case which requires not just your web data, but also your ad spend data from the ad networks, right? So that's kind of one example. If you look at that cart abandoned use case, right, where you want to like, let's say, give out coupons to some high value customers who think are like important, right? Again, that requires your web data, like to understand like they're abandoned and then dropped off. But to understand like how valuable is the customer, you typically also want to bring in historic transaction data, right? And that transaction data is often not captured in your web activity. Sometimes it is, sometimes it is not. Right? It is probably comes from your production database, which is like you have to run some kind of a ETL into your data warehouse and combine those two data sources, right, to create that. So there's another use case where you have to combine multiple data sources to like come up with that like lifetime value score of a customer. So I can keep going on and on about the use cases, but like these show that you have to combine like not just like your web activity data, which is extremely important, web or product activity data, but also like these other data sources. And this is where I think the warehouse first story really comes in, right? It is very hard to do these joins, if you will, across data sources, completely a third-party SaaS, like something like Segment and so on.
As far as the target users that you're focusing on for Rudderstack, you've enumerated the target use cases where it's definitely this end-to-end integration and flow of data, but for this scope of customer information. But in terms of the users of this platform, who do you kind of think about as far as the personas, and how does that influence the focus and prioritization of the features and the user experience that you build into Rudderstack?
Yeah, so that is the other key thing compared to like all the other CDPs that are differentiator. Like we are laser focused on the data persona. Sometimes like it is the engineering team, sometimes it's a separate data team, but like we strongly believe that that is the persona who should be owning the customer data stack and who should be building out those use cases. So if you think about like companies like Amazon, it is not the marketing team which is building out the customer data stack. It is very much the engineering team. Same thing is happening across the board now. Like even like traditional like e-commerce companies, we have enough customers where like they're putting together a separate data team under like a head of data or chief data officer who are like thinking about this holistically. Marketing is definitely one of the top use cases, but the use cases are beyond marketing. Like one of customers, for example, is like have built a personalization like a engine for support calls. People call in and you want to see the entire history of like what happened to the customer, what is the lifetime value, and then so on. And then that is a very support use case, not a marketing use case. Again, built on top of like a customer data stack stored in a data warehouse. So yeah, that's kind of the reason we kind of laser focused. And to answer your second question, once we know that that is the persona, like everything around the product experience to like open source and so on is trying to appeal to that persona, right? I mean, how do you make the best product for data people and engineers?
And recently you have started offering a managed service for Rudderstack so that folks don't have to deal with the setup and maintenance of the actual infrastructure to run the platform. They're able to just take advantage of a running instance. They can just add the integrations that they want, manage their data flows. And I'm curious how that shifts the kind of range of user profiles that are a good fit for Rudderstack, where maybe you don't have to have all of the DevOps and infrastructure knowledge to be able to get it up and running. You just need to be able to understand what are these data flows that I care about and the types of transformations or integrations that I want to build.
Interestingly, like that was one of the key learnings when we started Rudderstack. Like we did not have an open source project to start with. That we started the company and then we launched the open source product, and at the same time, almost like launched a cloud offering, right? And if you had asked me, then my hypothesis would have been that like data engineers love open source. They would all like download the open source product and then not go with the cloud tier. But what we have learned is like our growth on the cloud tier is like way faster than like on the open source. Like even in large companies, it's not just like two people developers who are trying the open source. So I think like people are firstly like realize that data integration is a means to an end. Nobody gets excited about like building another integration or like setting up like an integration platform. Definitely not getting paged if something is down, right? So yeah, maybe that is the reason we have a lot more adoption on the cloud. So I think, like, to answer your specific question, I don't think the persona has shifted at all, like with the cloud offering. In fact, like, it's the same persona, and we are seeing more adoption on the cloud than on the open source. Of course, like, there are companies who are excited about open source, like, who culturally believe we'll never buy like a cloud or like hosted product, and we have the open source for them, and we are like excited to support them.
As far as the application of Rudderstack compared to some of those tools that we were mentioning of the data integration and the reverse ETL, you said that you're scoped more specifically to the customer data use case, and I'm curious some of the ways that that manifests as far as the integrations that you target as far as data sources and destinations, and some of the types of transformations that you support, or some of the ways that you think about the design of those integrations that make them well suited to these customer use cases, and some of the types of records or data formats that are typical for these customer use cases that make it worth being specialized in that way.
That's a great question. And I think there are two ways to answer this. One is like the integrations themselves. If you take like an ETL vendor like Fivetran, Stitch, for example, they will integrate with like every source NetSuite, and think of some things which are traditionally not like customer data sources, right? So that's kind of when it comes to integrations per se. And some sources, we know that like when it comes to customer data, like 4 or 5 sources which are very important like for putting the data. On the ETL side, event stream is absolutely important, particularly if you're like a consumer company. That's kind of on the sources side. Again, on the destination side, I think the reverse ETL vendors are also like early in their journey. So it's not like we probably have a lot more integrations because of our event stream product, like we have them to segment. But for example, like because we are selling more to consumer companies, like Salesforce is less important, although we have that integration, as opposed to like something like Braze, or like the marketing tools are more important. So it's like we have kind of those kind of things between like more to do with like what kind of companies we are selling to. And transformations is again important. The way we think about this data is like we are landing the data ourselves, right? So like we know what is the data format. Our customers are doing the transformations in the warehouse. So they land all the data into the warehouse. Then they will write some DBT or Spark jobs to like combine all that data, create this like user profile. Right? Think of it as like a big table, one row per user with a bunch of features computed for those users. And this is then fed into like an analytics dashboard or like an ML pipeline or even an activation engine, right? So we are kind of like building this feature where you don't have to like write DBT jobs to do that. You define what features you care about, and Rudderstack will instantiate this table in the warehouse. So directly feed into these use cases, and eventually we'll build some of the use cases as well, right? So that's how we kind of think about this. But like taking a step back, I think the way we should think about this is like some customers have already built an infrastructure, right? I mean, I have my event streaming infrastructure. I have an ETL vendor in place. I have data in the warehouse. And I just need like the reverse piece of getting the data. I mean, I have built all the infrastructure and I need reverse. So reverse ETL is a perfect product for that. I think these companies will do well. Like they're great teams building great products. At the same time, some customers are taking that journey from day one. I have to like start collecting data. And this generally not, I mean, to our surprise, this is not like just like mom and pop startups or like 5 people startups. Like even large public companies are like deploying data teams and deciding, okay, now we need to think holistically about data. If you are starting the journey there, about starting with like data collection and eventually want to take the whole journey, that's where we want to come in. Like that is our sweet spot. So again, like depending on the maturity of the company and so on, I think like Rudderstack versus one of those vendors.
Have you found that when somebody adopts Rudderstack that they might be replacing one or a set of tools that they've already started tying together, or is it usually homegrown systems that they're starting to replace in the event that they're not just completely greenfield?
Like I'd say, like if I had to take a guess, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 is like sometimes they're replacing like an existing system, a commercial system. I don't want to name vendors, but like either it's like too expensive or it doesn't go with their like future needs of like what they're trying to do. So that's kind of 1/3. The second 1/3 is like they have some DIY solution, it is breaking, the person who wrote the code is gone and nobody wants to maintain that. So they want to like think holistically. And then 1/3 is like almost like their first time thinking about collecting, or thinking or not. I mean, like the data team is trying to figure out like now, like maybe they're collecting some data into like some marketing tools, but like now they're thinking about the customer data architecture with the warehouse first approach. And that's kind of the other one.
In terms of the kind of identity resolution aspect of working with customer data. That's definitely a very core need for people who are trying to understand the interactions that they have with their customers or with their end users. And particularly when you're dealing with event stream or clickstream data from web or even from mobile apps, where somebody starts off as an anonymous user and then they start to go through that customer journey where eventually they convert to creating an account on the platform, or maybe they have multiple different interactions where they are an anonymous user on multiple different devices before they convert, or they bounce back and forth. And I'm curious how you approach that identity resolution and entity resolution problem in Rudderstack and some of the kind of systems that you've built in to be able to support that, and some of the specific domain expertise that's needed by the company to be able to feed into that engine to be able to manage that mapping.
I mean, this is one of the biggest pain points, particularly in the consumer world, right? So there are like three kinds of identity resolution. One is like event stream identity resolution, which is deterministic. Specific example you gave, right? I'm anonymous on the web browser. I log in with my email, right? So at that point, I know that this login user ID or email is the same as that anonymous ID, right? The cookie ID, because I logged in, right? So that's kind of like deterministic identity. And let's say I came on a mobile device and I logged in with the same email, then you can know that this anonymous browse ID and that email ID and the mobile device ID, they are the same person, right? So we kind of know that because like there's a direct edge association. And that's what we handle as a part of the core Rudderstack offering, right? So when you land the data into the warehouse, we'll create this identity table. We'll say that all these anonymous IDs and all these device IDs and all these emails and user IDs, they are of the same user, and give it a canonical Rudderstack ID. So that's kind of the one part of identity resolution. Now, if you look at the broader identity space in the online world, there is also like non-deterministic ID resolution, or like whether you call it non-deterministic, probabilistic, or basically going through some third-party vendors, right? Like those guys, like for example, like LiveRamp is a good vendor, and there are a couple of other vendors also. They eventually all got acquired. And they do a good job of associating users even when we do not have that edge. So even if they did not log in with an email, they can say that this anonymous ID on the browser is the same as that anonymous ID on some other browser, and the same as this device ID on this phone, right? And they collect this data through like, I mean, sometimes neat ways, sometimes shady ways around like associating users, right? They get data from publishers and games and so on. And I mean, I have kind of worked in this space in this previous company, so I can get into the details, but like they apply like really sophisticated machine learning algorithms to like tie those users together, right? So that's kind of the second level identity matching. And Rudderstack does not do that, but our customers can do that. It is like as simple as loading these third-party vendor like JavaScripts, right? You load like a JavaScript, they will give you, let's say, like a LiveRamp ID, and you pass that as a Rudderstack event. And if the same user on the SDK on the mobile side can pass on like a LiveRamp ID on the mobile, and then they're the same LiveRamp ID, you know that they're the same user. And LiveRamp has figured this mapping between device ID and LiveRamp IDs and all that stuff, right? So that is non-deterministic ID, which you can like latch on top of Rudderstack if you want to do that. Some of our customers are doing that. The third part of the identity resolution is what happens in the warehouse. So you got all these like events tagged with like Rudderstack ID or like LiveRamp ID or something, right? So you know that these events belong to the same user. But then you're also bringing in other data, right? You're bringing in data from your ticketing system. You're bringing, let's say, your CRM data. How do you know that like this CRM record is the same as this user ID? Sometimes it is like the same email. You just join on emails. Sometimes you have to go like multiple levels of joins, right? Let's say your app uses user IDs, but then you have an email stored somewhere, and that email is the same as the lead record CM in your CRM and so on. So you have to do all these kind of joins. And that is very, very customer specific, right? Every customer has their own way of joining identities across these systems. So that is where I think like we don't do much. Our customers are taking care of it themselves, right? Part of the transformations I was saying, right? I mean, you get this raw data and you want to create this one user table with like one row per user. A big part of that is that join that you need to do across different systems. Our customers are doing that. They're doing it in SQL or like Spark or something. But then when we launch this, we are working on this feature, as I said, like programmatically creating that user. And that there we'll take that identity resolution function as an input, and then we'll go and execute. But generally that's specified by the customer.
Digging into the architecture of Rudderstack itself, I'm wondering if you can describe a bit about how it's implemented and some of the design of the platform and the ways that you have architected it to allow for this extensibility and being able to support all of these different sources and destinations and some of the mapping between them.
So at the core of it, like we are a streaming platform, right? Like one way to think about it is like you have the stream of events coming in, and you have to fan it out to all these different destinations, right? And what are the guarantees you need? Number one is that, like, if an event comes into Rudderstack and you act that okay, now the event is persisted, like then the client can delete. So you cannot lose the event once it comes in, right? So that's kind of one thing. And then you have to go and deliver to all these different destinations. So you have to handle things like destination failures, like a destination can be down for extended periods of time, right? So you should have to like persist the event and retrying for some time and then so on. So you kind of like have to build a streaming engine. You can build on top of Kafka, but like there are like a whole lot of reasons we did not go with Kafka. So like I can get into the details, but like we have built our own streaming engine to like handle this, right? So that's a conceptual level how this works. Now, what are the other things we need to worry about? Number one is like event ordering, right? So sometimes for a given end user, you don't want events to be delivered out of order. I mean, you want the login event to come before like maybe a transaction event because like you will build reports on top, right? So the system is designed to handle that. Scale is an important factor, right? How do you like scale to like billions and billions of events? But like scale is easy because this is a trivially parallelizable system. Like for end users events, like that, like for different end users, like there is no overlap between the events. You can like just route them to different nodes. You have to handle event ordering if you like scale up and scale down, but that's again built into the system. So that's kind of the core Rudderstack. You can scale up, scale down, and everything is built on like Kubernetes. So like we bet on that early, like our open source, our commercial offering, everything is like built on Kubernetes, and that's what we leverage for like all the scale up, high availability, and so on.
In terms of the extension and integration points that are available in the platform, what are the different hooks or kind of types of plugins that developers and end users are able to add, or ways that end users might add additional customizations that maybe wrap the Rudderstack experience?
There are like different levels of integrations, right? One is like, let's say it's a destination that you want to add in Rudderstack. There are two ways to do that. Our entire like destination catalog code base is open source. So we have like people who have contributed new destinations to Rudderstack, and they're using that, right? So that's kind of one way to do that. The other is like you can use our webhook destination, right? So we have like a generic way to like add any destination using the webhook framework, right? So that's kind of other way. And then we have customers who have done that, and then eventually we have kind of taken that code and wrapped into a like a native destination. So that's on the destination side. When it comes to the source side, like event stream is straightforward. Like we have a Rudderstack protocol. There's not much to add. I mean, in fact, like there are SDKs. We have customers contributing SDKs. Like we have somebody developed a .NET SDK. Like Segment has been very generous with like open sourcing a bunch of their SDK, and we are API compatible. So even those work out of the box. I think that's one part. The other part is the ETL sources, right? So we support like our own sources. Like we have a bunch of our custom sources, but we also support like the Singer protocol. And now like Airbite has a protocol as well, right? So if you have like any of those open source projects, like you can use one of those integrations, or you can like custom build conforming to those protocols, and those can work out of box on Rudderstack. So in fact, like there is still a small, and I mean, there's still a minor lift to integrate that into the platform. Like particularly if you're using the cloud offering, how do you run your own native integration? But like it can be done.
And as far as the evolution of the product, you mentioned that it's only been about 2 years since you first started working on it, but I'm curious over that time how the goals and design and use cases of the platform have changed or evolved, and in particular, given the amount of change and the velocity of the ecosystem over that period, how that has influenced your thinking about the role of Rudderstack in the data space.
I think the vision was always the same. I think like we wanted to build like a warehouse for CDP. I mean, this was exactly what I was doing in my previous job at 8x8, like trying to build this exact set of use cases on something like a Redshift. And the challenges I faced was the reason for starting Rudderstack. So I don't think the vision has changed. What was really surprising though is the momentum we have seen. And like, again, I'd say like we got lucky in some sense, like Segment got acquired, and the companies like they're distracted. Twilio has their own charter to take Segment. So that's kind of one thing. Data warehouses themselves have exploded, right? I mean, now like 2018-19, Snowflake was even like still early, right, in that sense. And now everybody has like knows about Snowflake. So like that explosion of data ecosystem. And then like the moment people buy data warehouses, they think about, okay, what can I do with that, right? So like any data collection vendor comes as a natural first step, right? So I think these things have kind of helped us accelerate and also like helped us focus, right? I think, for example, one thing we are realizing is like reverse ETL is exciting, important, like, and for something, but like a lot of the market is still at like data collection, right? I mean, warehouse adoption is at 5%. There will be 20x more companies just deploying cloud data warehouses and getting data into the data warehouse, right? So those parts are like ingestion is probably a bigger problem, a fast growing market, and so on. So like, yeah, it's more about product prioritization and so on, but the vision has not really changed.
In terms of the security and regulatory considerations that come along with dealing with customer data and potentially private information, how are you designing in some of those considerations in Rudderstack so that users of the platform can add in the specific controls that they need to enforce or be able to layer in some additional security applications? So maybe they're using something like an Immuta for data governance and access control, and some of the ways that Rudderstack is able to coexist with some of these systems.
Yeah, I think that is where also the warehouse first story really shines, right? Our story is pretty simple, right? I mean, we are not creating another silo of customer data. We don't want to store your PII. It's like the integration layer of getting the data into the warehouse, and then we'll do some relevant transformation on that data. But like the data still stays with you in your warehouse. You have complete control. So I think that resonates very well when like compared to other CDP vendors, right? The traditional CDP vendors. That's kind of one part of it. The other part of it is like more features, right? I mean, even if you say that the data is in the warehouse, you still need to support like deletion request. I mean, the customer is painful for them to go and figure out how to delete data, particularly if you have to delete data across like 20 different destinations and your data warehouse. So like there are features like that. How to integrate with like consent tools. Like these are features. We have some of them. We are like kind of working more on like. So yeah, that's kind of the other part of it. The third part of it is like it's more of product marketing. There is a lot of concern around like cookies going away. Apple has like all the IDFA going away. So like if you look at the broader marketing ecosystem, then people are realizing that the traditional like the DMPs and the DSPs and all those like people, they're like kind of going away, right? So first party data is extremely important. Own your customer data. You cannot rely on that data being stored in Google and like relying completely on Google to like give you the tools to work on that data, right? You have to take ownership of your customer data. So I think like this broader ecosystem like has definitely helped us, the first party vendors. So it's three stages, I would say, like general cookies going away and so on is helping pretty much every first party data vendor, whether it's us or all the other CDP vendors. Second is like we don't store any data. That also helps telling the story that, yeah, I mean, we are not creating another data silo. Everything is with you. You have complete transparency. And third is like just features to enable that privacy and compliance for our customers.
Today's episode is sponsored by Prophecy.io, the low-code data engineering platform for the cloud. Prophecy provides an easy-to-use visual interface to design and deploy data pipelines on Apache Spark and Apache Airflow. Now all the data users can use software engineering best practices, Git, tests, and continuous deployment with a simple-to-use visual designer. How does it work? You visually design the pipelines, and Prophecy generates clean Spark code with tests and stores it in version control. Then you visually schedule these pipelines on Airflow. You can observe your pipelines with built-in metadata search and column-level lineage. Finally, if you have existing workflows in Ab Initio, Informatica, or other ETL formats that you want to move to the cloud, you can import them automatically into Prophecy, making them run productively on Spark. Learn more at dataengineeringpodcast.com/prophecy. In terms of the workflow of getting started with Rudderstack and starting to integrate it into your workflow and integrate it into an existing data platform, what is the process of going from deciding that Rudderstack is a fit for the problem that you have and then working through implementing it and getting it deployed and running in your production environment?
Yeah, I think like that kind of depends on like what is the use case you're kind of trying to deploy, right? And like if you, for example, start with the marketing attribution use case where you want to just like look at what marketing spends are driving more leads, right? So if you just care about that use case, it's literally deploying the Rudderstack JavaScript SDK on your website And coming to the dashboard, setting up the source, setting up the Snowflake warehouse, and collecting your Google Ads data, everything will start flowing into the warehouse. And then we have dbt models, we have both dbt models as well as like Spark, Jupyter Notebook, ML models to like build out those attribution dashboards, right? So literally you can get up and running in like maybe half a day. So that's kind of one extreme. But then it's not just collecting web activity data. It's around like tracking events and collecting data from your mobile apps and so on. So then you have to think about, like, if you already have a tracking plan, that's easy. If you don't have one, then you have to think about what events are important. And then it's a journey that you start with some events and then like adding more and more as you go. Those things will take some more time, right? I think we generally work with our customers to tell them our best practices around event collection and what are the things they care about. And then it's not just us, like the broader ecosystem is also teaching the world, right, that event collection is important. So, but we have had customers who are already on like some competitive vendor like segment. If you're switching over, then it's like literally like one switch, right? You can go up and running in like an hour, depending on it kind of depends on where the customer is and what they're trying to achieve.
As far as the operational considerations for people who are running it themselves, what are some of the challenges that are involved in being able to manage it and being able to understand what the scaling patterns are, what the limitations are to those scaling abilities, what the different kind of components are that need to be orchestrated in relation to each other, and just some of the additional knowledge that's required beyond just understanding the mapping of the data?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I did not cover that in my previous answer also, right? So if you're trying to run Rudderstack open source version, not the cloud offering, then running a single node is pretty easy. Like if you have access to a Kubernetes cluster, it's like we have Helm charts. You can just deploy Helm charts and you should have like Rudderstack running a single node version. If you want a multi-node version, I mean, it's generally trivially parallelizable. You can just like run multiple nodes and then put some kind of a load balancer proxy to route events across them, right? So like even that is easy. The only thing that is not available in that is the event ordering. I mean, you have to make sure that if you care about event ordering, and you may not, like for some destinations, event ordering does not matter because, like, for example, if you're sending to Amplitude, like they will look at the timestamp of the event and order themselves anyway. Like the order of arrival doesn't matter. Like they'll just look at the timestamp and define things, right? And a lot of other destinations do that. So for something like that, then you just scale Rudderstack, set multiple nodes, and put a load balancer and send data to everyone, and then Rudderstack will send data to all the destinations, right? So you can go up and running pretty fast. Like I think we have done a good job on supporting our open source customers. And I mean, it's kind of self-padding, but like we have an open source channel. If you run into any issues, we have been supportive and we absolutely want them to be successful. We have some large customers, like other open source companies deploying the open source version of Rudderstack, like Grafana and Gatsby and so on. So yeah, that's what it is. But then if you want event ordering, that's when I think it's not available in the open source version. I mean, we are finally also want to make money and like run it as a viable business.
In terms of that boundary of the open source versus the commercial, I'm curious how you think about that and some of the governance that goes along with running an open source project that is so closely tied to the business model that you're operating on.
We own the rights to the open source project. Like we raised money, we formed the company even before the first line of the code was written, right? And then we kind of open sourced the project as well as we started a cloud offering, almost like together, right? So I think it's not like another open source project Apache founded own, like and then where there is a conflict between like the company and who owns the rights to the open source and so on. So I think like that way things are pretty clear. Now, but it's still a valid question that like what is always like I don't say it's always like we have a point of view, like, but I think it's always like a question that like what goes into open source, what doesn't go into open source, right? I think the way we think about this is like finally, as we said, like it's building out the platform, right? Event stream is one part of it, but there are like multiple other bits to take you through that entire journey. So event stream is open source. There are certain features which are not available in the open source, which is like multi-node scaling, transformations, and so on, and like a fully featured UI. That's not open source. All the integrations are open source. We'll keep making everything open source on that side, right? So that's how we think about it. The rest of the platform is not open source. If you want to care about that, you have to go to either the cloud offering. We also have on VPC offering where if you don't want to send data outside, we can run it inside your VPC. So that's the other thing I did not touch upon in our like privacy question. Like we also have that feature where we can run the entire stack inside a customer's Kubernetes environment. So, and we have some customers who do that, like fintech vertical and so on.
And as far as the kind of use cases or capabilities or features of Rudderstack, what are some of the things that you think are either often overlooked or underemphasized, or use cases that you think are worth highlighting that people might not realize it's able to support?
I think a lot of our customers also don't know that like we have ETL and reverse ETL and so on. So we have customers who have bought us for event streaming and some other product for the other parts, right? So I think that is part of it is product problem, particularly on the ETL side. I think like we are definitely way behind like other vendors in the space, but on the other reverse ETL, I think we are pretty competitive. So that's one thing I would say, and this like our fault that our product marketing needs to catch up. And the other part of it, this is like what other features I might want to highlight. I think with data governance and data quality, I think like we have support for like tracking plans and things like that. The product also needs improvement, but I think like we can definitely do a better job of highlighting that feature, because this is a common pain point that people have right around guaranteeing that like your events are conforming to a tracking plan and like spurious events are not being introduced and so on.
In terms of the ways that you've seen Rudderstack applied, what are some of the most interesting or innovative or unexpected ways that you've seen it used or integrated with people's data flows?
And this is a request, this keeps coming up, right? I mean, people interestingly want to send log data via Rudderstack, because at some extent, like log data is also like customer event, right? So like you have like requests coming to your web server, and then instead of you generating an event, you're generating logs, and then you want to ship those logs to Rudderstack. And then we have a transformation framework where you can like parse the event. So they ship the whole log as an event, and in a transformation, parse out like specific parts of the logs, right? To like say this is the user ID and this is the event name. And then you send that to Google Analytics or Amplitude so that you can do reporting. I thought that was pretty cool. Like, and because we did not have like a native SDK to like something like Fluentd or something, so that they kind of like build their own thing to like ship logs into to Rudderstack. That's, I think, not a use case we recommend, partly because of the scale. I mean, like the volume is typically an orders of magnitude more. I mean, like 90% of the log lines are useless. They're sending everything through Rudderstack and then like throwing away everything except those few lines which have the customer events, right? So it's much better to generate an event for that. But like that's one thing people have used Rudderstack for.
In your own experience of building the Rudderstack product and the company, what are some of the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned in the process?
Technical, I would say, like unlike my previous companies, like I think we have been in a fortunate state that we have scaled rapidly, and like it's often like, I mean, some of maybe I can go back and revisit some of the engineering decisions. Like you always like initially you're trying to like launch as soon as possible, but then you have to later go and fix some of those things to like handle scale and reliability and so on. That's one thing, I guess. Like if we knew that we'll grow this fast, then we would have probably spent more time upfront, is what I would say. But that's like a moot point. That's kind of on the technical side. I'm pretty happy with what we have achieved from the engineering perspective. On the organization side, I think like, yeah, I mean, we should have invested a lot more on design and product marketing. I mean, we are like literally just an engineering run company for first year and a half, like almost 2 years. And I think that does show up in our product experience and our UI and so on. I think like we definitely do a much better job. I am an engineer, a very data engineer and so on. I mean, like, so user experience is not something which is very natural to me. So we should have invested in that, is one thing I would say. Other than that, yeah, I mean, like hiring is a problem, right? I don't know if we could have done anything different, but you just have to like solve it.
And for people who are interested in being able to manage these overall workflows of customer data and being able to integrate with their various sources and destinations or use their data warehouse for transforming or enriching, what are the cases where Rudderstack is the wrong choice and maybe they're better off going with a different vendor or building their own in-house tools, or maybe it's not the wrong choice but not the sufficient kind of complete solution?
I have to think through that. I think if you have like really custom requirements, right? I mean, like you cannot conform to the Rudderstack schema for whatever reason, because you have already instrumented your code to do certain things and you have like legacy events and so on. And it's a big lift to go and replace that. So maybe that's the reason maybe you should build something from scratch. But other than that, for this pure use case of like event collection and routing and so on, I think like, I mean, yes, Rudderstack or like some other competition. I mean, like there are other players in this space, but I don't think like you should definitely build something yourself unless there are strong like legacy reasons. The other thing is like if you look at for a broader CDP use case, right? It's not just like event collection, but you're thinking about like solving a customer data use case. And then you are like, let's say you're a marketing with like one engineer or one data analyst, and you don't have the time resources to together this infrastructure of like building a warehouse and so on. And like then you should go with one of the existing like off the shelf CDPs, and that's perfectly fine. So we don't even sell to the marketing persona.
As you continue to evolve and grow the Rudderstack product and the open source and the business, what are some of the things you have planned for the near to medium term, or any particular areas that you're excited to dig into?
Yeah, on the product and engineering side, I think like what we have built as the plumbing layers of data, right? I mean, getting all this like event stream data, cloud data, like send it back to the different destinations through reverse ETL. So we've kind of built the plumbing layer. The opportunity is to now build the transformations layer on top of the warehouse, which our customers are doing. So how do you like do that programmatically and like without having to write like complex DBT logics and so on, DBT or Spark? That's kind of the first part. And then second is like, how do you truly make it a platform so that like not just you, but other people can go and build interesting applications of that unified data model. I don't think we have completely figured that out, but like we have some initial ideas around that. So that's kind of what I'm really excited about.
And are there any other aspects of the overall space of building a customer data platform or the work that you're doing at Rudderstack or the open source or organizational aspects that we didn't dig into that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
We are hiring, so there's a lot of interesting problems to be solved in this space. Excited about this, but we need a team to go and execute.
All right. Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with you and follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as a final question, I'd like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest gap in the tooling or technology that's available for data management today.
When I think from our customers, right, I think like data integration is kind of solved, right? Hopefully we'll solve some of that. Data pipelining, all that is solved. I think one thing is like data quality and data management is still a problem, right? I mean, you have all these different events coming in, and how do you make sure that like you're not introducing odious events and like things are not breaking down, and there are like multiple layers of failures, right? So I don't think like we have like figured out the right solution. I think like data quality can be enforced at multiple layers, right? At the source where you're generating the events, at the pipeline layer, people like Rudderstack who are shipping the data, or at the destination where you're like writing into the warehouse, things like data expectations and so on, or after the land, right? In your warehouse, somebody's just scanning and then monitoring things. I think like some data quality vendors are doing it at the warehouse, but I think sometimes it's probably too late. So what is the right way to enforce like data quality? And data catalog also kind of fills under that. Like you have all these things coming in. How do you like create a good catalog of everything? And it's not just like raw data, but also like you have transformed data and you're creating all these features. It's a mess. Like somebody needs to come up with like a clean solution to this.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to join me and share the work that you're doing at Rudderstack. I'm sure there are lots of other areas that we could dig into at Rudderstack and some of the other sort of surrounding ecosystem, but appreciate the time that you've been able to take today and all of the effort that you and your team have put into building such a great product. It's definitely a useful entry into the ecosystem. I appreciate all the time and energy you've put into that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks a lot. I'm truly humbled to be on the show, and it was really great chatting with you.
Likewise. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out our other show, podcast.init, at pythonpodcast.com to learn about the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used. And visit the site at dataengineeringpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. If you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at dataengineeringpodcast.com with your story. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends and coworkers.